Think about what it is that we do. Matter of fact, they have a saying, keeping up with the Joneses. Think about how many of us are chasing after that, and what it is, or what's happening. We're missing the mark. We're missing what it is that we should be aiming at. And as a result, we get choked out. Okay? In another passage, you find in Proverbs chapter 8 and verse 36. Okay? And in that passage, the idea of failure is implied. So when you get an opportunity, you can read those, study those, and you'll see how this term is used. And what that does, it broadens now our understanding of what it means when he says to sin. Okay? Now, another point, let me get this out the way, and the last point to be made before we move on, with the word chata. Now, this focuses on the parent root, the chet and the tet. All right? Now, the action of the chet and the tet is to measure. Now, this is what you need to do. There is a word, okay, that we derive from that. And wouldn't you know, I did not put that word up here. Sometimes, a perfect example, you know, in preparation, sometimes we're rushing. And it was my intent to put that up there, but something else distracted me, and I needed to get this prepared. So I rushed. But I can get that for you later, so that it's not a big issue. There's a term where this word is used. Let me put it up here this way. The chet, the tet, the vav, and the tet. Okay? And the word is chut. Chut. Okay? But it also has the connotation of a cord. Alright? And a cord in the sense of using it to measure. So the idea of measuring, that's one of the actions. But think about that. The parent root to this term, which means sin, okay, and to miss the mark. Matter of fact, let me read this to you. When shooting an arrow or other object to a target, the distance that one misses is measured with a cord. The wrong actions of one are also measured against the correct action. Now, the thought that the Most High put on my mind when it came to that, the whole concept of the measuring. Now, if you don't mind, and this is a chet wav tet, if you want to look that word up, okay? My apologies for not having a strong number for you, but a little piece of homework, an additional piece of homework that you can do. First thought that the Most High put on my mind, and forgive me if I don't draw this correctly, but and what this is supposed to be, scales. Okay? Think about that. So we also learn from the way that this word is formed, sin is being measured. Think about it. And where do we fall? See, because now comes to mind the whole choice that we are taught from that first man and that first woman. See? Because we are now in the era where the Most High said we will be given the knowledge, which is simply information. But it's not just information that's on a page. It's information that we gain from our life experience. You see? So we're in the era of the knowledge of good and evil. This is where we are. So we experience both in our lives. we experience some good, we experience some evil. But not only do we experience it, we at times do some good. And at times we do some evil. But when it comes time to stand before the judge, and our works are now put in the balance or the scale, what is going to outweigh? Is it going to be our sin, or is it going to be our obedience? Disobedience versus obedience. What is it going to be? You know, and I think that's another interesting point to consider when it comes to the whole idea of sin. So now, taking all of this out of the way, what are we talking about here? Let's go down. He says, not only did he say, if a soul shall sin, also says, through ignorance. If a soul shall sin through ignorance. So now this is a whole new term here. So let me put this up here for you to look up. Through ignorance. 7, 6, 8, 4. The word is shagaga. Shagaga. Okay? Now, of course, this is the shin. Gimel, Gimel. Hey. Shin, Gimel, Gimel, Hey, Shagaga. And what does that mean? It says a mistake but then it says inadvertent transgression. Inadvertent transgression. Okay. Now, what does it mean to do something inadvertently? You look it up, it results from negligence. What is negligence? Or carelessness. You know, the lack of not caring. Think about that. Compare that to the whole idea that we looked at in, what's that, Proverbs chapter 19, about the man who's in a hurry and misses his way. See? Now, although the word ignorance, now a lot of times people look at that and the implication is, based on our understanding, somebody may be dumb or stupid, when we say, man, you're ignorant. But when you look at the word, let me write this up here for you. Ignorant. There's another word that you see here. And I'm going to underline it, then I'm going to erase the last part. Ignore. That's the other word that's part of ignorant. So when you talk about somebody that ignores something, doesn't necessarily mean that they're dumb, doesn't necessarily mean that they're stupid, doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that they don't know what they're doing. They are ignoring it. And a lot of times we ignore things because we choose to ignore things. Okay? So when you think about the whole idea of inadvertent, so it's not that we don't know, we're neglecting our responsibility. It's not that we're unaware, we're being careless about it. You see? Think about it. Get all this out the way. Let's read down a little further. And I'm not going to keep you too long, stopping and going. But those are two terms that I wanted to touch on before we get any further. Now, as we go through these different specifications in chapter 4, one of the things we're going to see, there are several points that need to be made. Okay, several points. And we're going to discuss those points after we've read through the entirety of the chapter, and then we'll backtrack and just point those things out, and then we'll be done with chapter 4. Okay? So, starting over, verse 1. And Yahweh spake unto Moshe, saying, Speak unto the sons of Israel, saying, If a soul shall sin through ignorance against any of the commandments of Yahweh, which ought not to be done, and shall do against any of them. Now, think about the language, which is very important. Okay? It says, against any of the commandments of Yahweh, which ought not to be done. Now, when it asks that, which ought not to be done, what is he talking about? We're familiar with it this way. What we refer to as the do's and the don'ts. The do's and don'ts. Okay? When you look at the commands that the Most High gave, there are commands where he says, you should do this, which are referred to as positive. There are things that the Most High commands us to do. Or the don'ts, which are considered to be negative. Okay? Some even refer to those as the prohibited. So when he says, if a soul shall sin through ignorance against any of the commandments of Yahweh, which ought not to be done, that means there's something that the Most High told us not to do, but we do it anyway. Okay? He says, and shall do against any of them. Now, as Bible students, we have to ask the question, why even add that last part to it? And that's just food for thought. Okay, let's continue. Verse 3. It says, now, what we just read in verse 2 is an overview of these particular offerings that we're about to get into. Now, he's about to start breaking down a very particular order, and we're going to see that as we go along. Okay? First thing, he says, and again, there's several points that need to be made about this. But I'm not going to touch on every point, as I mentioned. But I'm just going to say this. When I get to certain verses, you are going to be strongly encouraged, especially if you're familiar with the Hebrew language, to look behind and see exactly what they're saying in Hebrew. And there's some gems there, guaranteed. There's some gems there. And this is one. Leviticus chapter 4 and verse 3. Okay? So listen to what it says. If the priest that is anointed. So I have to write this up here. As we go along, we're going to see what's happening. If the priest that is anointed do sin according to the sin of the people, then let him bring for his sin, which he hath sinned, a young bullock. Now, another interesting point with that, the word translated as young in the Hebrew language is actually two words. Ben Bakar, which can be translated son of the cattle. Just keep that in mind. And you can search that out on your own. It says, which he hath sinned, is a young bullock without blemish unto Yahweh for a sin offering. I got to put this up there because this is our next offering. Chata'at. Okay? Chata'at. And now, this is our sin offering. Okay? Now remember, the first three offerings, your Olah, your Mincha, your Shalamim, there was nothing that precipitated you giving those offerings. But now, we're being introduced to an offering that you give when something else is done. As we saw when we break one of the don't commandments. You see, now we are required to give a sin offering. Okay? Let's keep on. He says, and the word chata'at is derived from the exact same term where we get our term sin, chata. He says, and he shall bring the bullock unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before Yahweh, and shall lay his hand, smicha. That's one of our stages, one of the acts that leads up to, or that is a part of the sacrificial system. Okay, the smicha, the laying on of the hands. Okay, and shall lay his hand upon the bullock's head. Now, why did he do that? Remember what we discussed. Whenever the person laid their hands on the head of the bullock, he was now transferring symbolically himself to that bullock, and that bullock was dying in his place. Everything that's going to be done to that bullock symbolically is something that's supposed to be done to us or whoever's offering it. Another change that you're going to see, whenever it came to these offerings previously, if you remember the olah and the shalamim particularly, because remember the mincha was a meal offering, okay? But when it came to the olah and when it came to the shalamim, the person that was bringing the offering had to do that. He had to lay the hands on. He had to actually go to the next step, which is to kill it. He had to do all these things. And after he did that, then the priest took it and did what he needed to do with the rest of it. Okay? But in this offering, it's different. See, as Bible students, we have to ask the question, why? Well, as we see, it says, again, verse 4. And he shall bring the bullock unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before Yahweh, and shall lay his hand, smicha, upon the bullock's head, and kill, shachita, that's the next step, the bullock before Yahweh. And the priest that is anointed, that's another verse, look that up, go behind the scenes a little bit. Beautiful gem you're going to find there. And the priest that is anointed shall take, Kabbalah, remember the gathering. See, that's the next step. Shall take of the bullock's blood and bring it, holaka, remember that, carry it to the tabernacle of the congregation. And the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle, zarika, the sprinkling. Now, these two things, well, not two things, but this one in particular, this wasn't done with the olah. This wasn't done with the shalamim, but it's done with the sin offering. Question, why? Why was it necessary to take some of the blood, and now, with this offering, I need to do this for you. Excuse me for a minute. Get this out the way for a quick second. Now, I'm going to take you back to something that we looked at before. Now, the way that the tabernacle was situated, okay? This is just going to be a rough diagram just so we can get the picture. Okay? Now, let's see. This is east. This is west. This is north. This is south. Okay? So here's the gate. You're entering at the gate, right? The very first thing that you're going to come across is the altar of burnt offering. Okay? Or the brazen altar. Alright? That's the first thing you're going to come across. The altar. Next thing you're going to come across, this is the basin. This is where they had to wash their hands and their feet before they put on the priest's garb. They put on the priest's garb, and now you have the tabernacle. Now this is the actual tabernacle right here. Now the tabernacle had two compartments. You had the holy place, and then you had the most holy place. Okay? Now, and when you come into the tabernacle, on this side you had the table of showbread. Okay? On this side you had the menorah with the 7 branches. Okay? Okay? But then you had the altar of incense here. Now this was the second altar. And what it had was 4 horns on it. Okay? Like I said, this is just a rough drawing. And then you had a veil, which was referred to as the Parochet. And then you had the Ark of the Covenant. But the Ark of this is two pieces. You had the actual Ark, or the box that certain items were kept in, but then you had a top to it. You know, I'm just going to draw it for the sake of, you know, you had on it the angels. Okay, like that. Like I said, rough drawing. But anyway. Now, everything that we read thus far, the Olah, offered here. The Mincha, the memorial of it, remember, offered here. The Shalamim, offered here. They didn't have to come in here yet. But now, when we get to the sin offering, now they're being given instructions on what to do in here. Now, why does that change? Is the question. Why did that change? Let's read on a little more. Food for thought. And whenever questions are asked, questions are never asked to leave people hanging. Let me say that, because I know sometimes how the mind gets. The questions are asked. Sometimes they're going to be answered. Sometimes they're just answered because the Creator wants you to start thinking. He wants you to start using that word. He wants you to start researching. Why is that? How come all these other offerings, you only did it right here, and when you get to the sin offering, now you bring it into the holy place? See, there's another offering, and when it comes to this part right here, the most holy place, there's one offering that you would offer, that you would come into this place one time a year. And as we go through the book of Vayikra, then we'll get to that eventually. And even when it comes to that, well, what does that mean? What does that point to? You see? Now keep this I can say to you. When Moshe was on the mount, right? Matter of fact, let's read that, as one of my brothers often like to say. Let me read that in your hearing. Okay? Now let's go to Shemut, or Exodus chapter 25. It's something that he has said, that is said. And let's go down to verse 8. This is when the Most High is giving Moshe the instructions. He told him all of the different items and everything, and I believe we looked at this before, but sometimes you just need to hear things over and over. In verse 8 it says, and let them make me a sanctuary. Okay? Now, he's talking about this part right here. This is the sanctuary, the tabernacle itself. That I may dwell among them, according to all that I show thee. What do you mean? That implies that everything that was built here, Moshe was shown that. Listen to what he said. After the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall ye make it. So in other words, Moshe was given a blueprint of how this was supposed to be. Well, here's the question. What is the blueprint based on? Think about that. What is the blueprint based on? What does all of this signify? What does it mean? And these are just, again, questions that are asked to get those, I was about to say creative juices running, but not necessarily creative juices, but to get the thought processes, you know, get them engines to start kicking up in that mind. Not on your own accord, you see. The hope is that you are a Bible student, and more importantly, a Bible believer, and that now, by way of His Holy Spirit, you're allowing that Spirit to now move on that heart and that mind, because what the Spirit going to do is going to start taking you through that word and establish with you what these things point to. They point to something. They mean something. And why are we emphasizing that? Because it's with the sin offering He's introducing us to get in the head. And then this right here. See, this part right here. When He told him to make that ark, right? One of the things that the Most High told to Moshe, He said that He was going to speak to him from between those two cherubim, or the cherubim, as it has in the King James Version. He's going to speak to them. So this part was sectioned out because this is the part where the Most High dwelled. See, this part right here, every priest couldn't get up in here. Only the Kohen HaKadosh can go in here one time a year. Think about that. That's supposed to mean something. That's supposed to get that mind working. You're like, okay, what are you teaching us there? Okay? Well, let's move on. Let's move on. Okay. So let's go back to Leviticus chapter 4, pick up at verse 6. It says, and the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle, once again, zarika, and sprinkle of the blood 7 times. Do a research on the word 7. What you're going to find is something very interesting. See, the word 7 also is a word that implies an oath. Why? What is it? What's the oath that has something to do with this sprinkling of the blood? What is he talking about? And sprinkle of the blood 7 times before Yahweh, before the veil of the sanctuary. So this is the altar of incense. This is the veil. And you sprinkle of it, right? It says, and the priest shall put some of the blood upon the horns of the Mizbeach of sweet incense. Right there. Okay? Before Yahweh, which is in the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall pour all the blood of the bullock at the bottom of the Mizbeach of the Olah. That's right out there. Which is at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. As soon as you come in, it's right there at the door. And he shall take off from it all the fat of the bullock for the chata'at, or sin offering, the fat that cover up the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver with the kidneys, it shall he take away. Sound familiar, right? Verse 10. As it was taken off from the bullock of the sacrifice of Shalomim, the peace offering. So hold up now, Bible students, we got to ask a question. Why does the sin offering share a similarity with the Shalomim, or the peace offering? What is he teaching us about that? Food for thought. And we have to ask these questions. It's not there for nothing. It's there because Abba trying to teach us something. He trying to reveal something to us. Question is, do we even care? Or if that's something in the Old Testament, we don't have to do it anyway. It doesn't matter anymore. If it didn't matter, he wouldn't have had it written. You know what doesn't matter? What's not written. That's what doesn't matter. Anything that the Most High inspired to be written is written for our learning. What is he teaching us? Okay? He says, verse 10 again, as it was taken off from the bullock of the sacrifice of Shalomim, and the priest shall burn. Here's the last step. Haktara. Okay? And the priest shall burn them upon the Mizbeach of the Olah, and the skin of the bullock, and all his flesh, with his head, and with his legs, and his inwards, and his dung, even the whole bullock shall he carry forth without the camp. Most High willing, we talk about what the camp consisted of another time. That's another beautiful lesson when you understand the camp and how Israel was actually situated around the courtyard and the tabernacle. Very beautiful illustration there, but like I said, I won't get into it right now. Verse 12 again. Even the whole bullock shall he carry forth without the camp unto a clean place, where the ashes are poured out, and burn him on the wood with fire. Where the ashes are poured out, shall he be burned. So now, that's up to verse 12. So now I need to get this out of the way. And remember our word, chata'at, that's our sin offering. Okay? But I need to make some room there. Okay. So, verse 13. You're going to get to the second little piece. It says, and if the whole congregation of Israel. What is this talking about? Now, most people, if you read this and you take this passage at face value, what you're going to believe is it's talking about the entire nation, right? But that's not what it's talking about. It's not talking about the whole congregation, including the men, women, and the children. This is actually talking about the elders. which would later be referred to, this is a foreign term, not Hebrew. Sanhedrin. This is who this is referring to. And we're going to allow the Torah to explain that as we go along. Now pay attention. And if the whole congregation of Israel sin through ignorance, and the thing be hid from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done somewhat against any of the commandments of Yahweh, which should not be done, and are guilty. When the sin which they have sinned against it is known, then the congregation shall offer a young, once again, Ben Bakar, bullock, for the sin, and bring him before the tabernacle of the congregation. Now, how are we going to know that this is not just the whole congregation of Israel? Like I said, as we go through, we're going to see more information. But what you want to do now, from here on out, compare what the priests offer to what the elders offer, and what you're going to find is the exact same thing. Listen to what it's saying. Verse 15. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands upon the head of the bullock before Yahweh, and the bullock shall be killed before Yahweh. Here's our third time. I want to strongly encourage y'all. Here's another verse you want to look behind it. And the priest that is anointed shall bring of the bullock's blood to the tabernacle of the congregation, and the priest shall dip his finger in some of the blood and sprinkle it 7 times before Yahweh, even before the veil. And he shall put some of the blood upon the horns of the Mizbeach, which is before Yahweh, that is in the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall pour out all the blood at the bottom of the Mizbeach of the Olah, which is at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he shall take all his fat from him and burn it upon the Mizbeach, and he shall do with the bullock as he did with the bullock for a chata'at. So shall he do with this. In other words, the same thing he did with the bullock for the priest is the same thing you do for the bullock for the elders. That's what he's saying. He said, and the priest shall make an atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. That's another important piece right there. I'm giving you a lot to jot down. If anybody's watching and taking notes, my apologies for not reminding you before you started. Have a pen and a pad, take some notes. But you can always go back and listen to it again. But jot that down, and it shall be forgiven them. Keep that in mind in that mental Rolodex, because that's significant. And we'll talk about why. Verse 21. And he shall carry forth the bullock without the camp, and burn him as he burned the first bullock. It is a chata'at for the congregation. Okay? So that's up to verse 21 now. We go to verse 22. Next thing. When a ruler, now you're talking about something else. Now the ruler can refer to the king. Now, do we see an order? As far as the Most High is concerned, you have the priest, you have the elders, and you have the ruler. This is a particular order that we see being established in Israel as we're going along. Okay? It says, and this is an order of importance, if you will. Okay? When a ruler hath sinned and done somewhat through ignorance against any of the commandments of Yahweh, his mighty one, which should not be done, and is guilty, or if his sin wherein he hath sinned come to his knowledge, he shall bring his offering, a kid of the goats, a male without blemish. Something different. Not the Ben Bekar of the son of the cattle. Not that, but a kid of the goats for this one. A male without blemish. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the goat, and kill it in the place where they kill the olah before Yahweh, it is a kata'at. And the priest shall take of the blood of the kata'at with his finger, and put it upon the horns of the mizbeach of olah, and shall pour out his blood at the bottom of the mizbeach of olah, and he shall burn all his fat upon the mizbeach as the fat of the sacrifice of shelamim, peace offerings. And the priest shall make an atonement for him as concerning his sin, and it shall be forgiven him. Keep that in mind, jot that down. And the last one, and this is where we know for certain that when it said the congregation of Israel did not refer to the entire nation. And this is what it says, verse 27. And if any one of the common people, these are your regular citizens of the nation. Okay? The commoners. Okay? So you have the priest, you have the elders or your Sanhedrin, you have the ruler, and then you have the commoners. In order. Okay? Interesting, right? And if anyone, and here's another point to be emphasized too. And it says if. Now if you've been paying attention, it says if the priest, if the congregation, if, and then here in verse 27, in the Hebrew it says uim, and if nefesh achat, soul of one. And if the soul of one of the common people. Okay? But when it got to verse 22, it says asher nasi. In other words, when a ruler. Food for thought. Why? And a lot of little things you got to jot down. But these are very significant particulars that you find in these different passages. And there's a reason. You know, but for time's sake, we're not going to get into all of that, like I mentioned earlier. All right. Verse 27, and we're going to read on through. And if any one of the common people sin through ignorance, while he doeth somewhat against any of the commandments of Yahweh, which ought not to be done, and be guilty, or if his sin, which he hath sinned, come to his knowledge, then he shall bring his offering, a kid of the goats, a female without blemish. You see how the priests and the elders practically offered the exact same thing, but then the ruler had to offer a kid of a goat, which was male, and then the commoners had to offer a kid of a goat, which was female. There's a distinction being made. Okay? Interesting. A kid of the goats, a female without blemish, for his sin which he hath sinned. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the chata'at, and slay the chata'at in the place of the olah. And the priest shall take of the blood thereof with his finger, and put it upon the horns of the mizbeach of olah, and shall pour out all of the blood thereof at the bottom of the mizbeach. And he shall take away all the fat thereof, as the fat is taken away from off the sacrifice of shelamim. And the priest shall burn it upon the mizbeach for a sweet savor unto Yahweh. And the priest shall make an atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven him. But then it gives him another option. And if he bring a lamb, same commoner. If you don't have a kid of a goat, then you can bring a lamb, the young of the sheep, for a chata'at. He shall bring it a female without blemish. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the chata'at, and slay it for a chata'at in the place where they kill the olah. And the priest shall take of the blood of the chata'at with his finger, and put it upon the horns of the mizbeach of olah, and shall pour out all the blood thereof at the bottom of the mizbeach. And he shall take away all the fat thereof, as the fat of the lamb is taken away from the sacrifice of the shelamim. And the priest shall burn them upon the mizbeach according to the isheh, an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. And the priest shall make an atonement for his sin that he hath committed, and it shall be forgiven him. Once again, and it shall be forgiven him. Now, let's backtrack for a second. In verse 35, when it talks about the commoner, that brings a lamb, a female, it shall be forgiven him. When you go up to verse 31, talking still, the commoner, who brings the kid of the goat as a female, and it shall be forgiven him. Right? When you get to the ruler, who brings the kid of the goat who is a male, in verse 26, and it shall be forgiven him. When you get to one of the elders, who brings the bullock, in verse 20,